Hello, I'm Father Emmett Farrell, and I'd like to start today a series of short videos on Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, the care of our common home. And I'm going to this morning just introduce you to Pope Francis and who is he, and then there will be a little short segment on each one of the 6 chapters of his book. Francis, as many of you have heard, is our first third world pope. He's also the first Jesuit and the first pope to have the name Francis, so we could call him Francis the First. As a third world pope, he looks at the world a little bit differently. First of all, he looks at it globally, and sometimes that's hard for us to comprehend what he's talking about, or why does he talk in those terms. He looks at the world from the bottom up, whereas most of the popes we've had, and most of us, would probably be looking at the world from the top down. For instance, he has a great love for and interest in concern for the poor. They are close to his heart as they were the heart of Jesus. He has a preferential option. And I even myself, reading his encyclical, who's he talking about? And finally he said the majority of the planet. There's another thing that marks the thinking, especially the methodology, as it were, of Pope Francis, as I call a 3-step dance, or a 3-step process. And some of you have probably heard this. It's see, judge, act. It's a little bit like a doctor who has a patient come before him and he says, okay, what's the problem? Where does it hurt? How long have you had that? Okay, and what are some of the symptoms? Okay, well, we have to get to the cause of this. So let's do some blood work, let's do some x-rays or whatever to pinpoint the cause of the real problem. It's kind of like social analysis. Once that is determined, the second step is a judgment step. And the doctor would go to the book of medicine to see what's the best medicine for this malady, and apply that. And the third step is applying the medicine. It's taking the medicine, doing the exercises, changing the diet, or whatever it is. If that doesn't work, we'll try something else, so to speak. Well, Francis did that before he wrote the encyclical. He called in the scientists. And the scientists I'm speaking about are from the Pontifical Institute of Science. It started after Galileo, so it's been around since, I think it's the 16th, 17th century. One of them is from San Diego. His name is Ramanathan, Dr. Ramanathan from UCSD. He's a Hindu from India, but he's very laudatory to the Vatican and to the popes. He was called by Pope John Paul II to serve on the Pontifical Institute of Science. He thought it was a gag, and the voice said, no, this is John Paul II. Anyway, he consulted the scientists, and they said climate change or global warming is real. And the principal cause, the reason for it, is human activity. And then Pope Francis went to the scriptures. This is the judgment step, or it's kind of like an illumination. It's turning on the light. We see the problem from the perspective of God, from the perspective of Jesus, of the scriptures, and church tradition. And also some of the encyclicals of the church, the teachings of the church over the years. And then there's the third step, doing something about it. Pope Francis is going to suggest highly that we need a dialogue, a new dialogue. We need a conversion of our habits, a new way of doing things. Going back to Francis, the name Francis. Why the name Francis? They asked him when he became pope, what name are you taking as a pope? He said Francis, because he admires Saint Francis. Saint Francis was, as you know, a great lover of nature. He wrote his famous Canticle of the Sun, praising everything that God has created. And Pope Francis starts off his encyclical with the first 2 words of the encyclical, usually become the title, and it's in Latin. So people say, what's Laudato Si? It means praise be to you, Lord, which is the first line and runs throughout the the Canticle of St. Francis, no? So praise be to you, Lord, for all of creation, no? You can find that, by the way, a larger version of it in the scriptures, in the 3rd chapter of the book of Daniel, or if you like, in Psalm 148, no? Personally, I would like to stress the urgency that there's a crisis in front of us, and we're very slow at responding. No? I say this for 4 reasons. First of all, the encyclical is the official authoritative voice of the Church. It's the only one of Francis's writings that is an encyclical, which gives it a more authoritative, powerful voice. No? Secondly, the scientists, the great majority, over 90% of them, agree that climate change is real and that the principal reason or cause is human activity. No? A third reason would be all the religious traditions of the world. I have books full of them. I have not yet found one. And this includes everything, not just Christian or Jewish or Muslim, but all of the other religious traditions of the world, the Buddhists or even the indigenous, their love for creation and the need to conserve, protect our environment, creation, in other words, no? And finally, in December of 2015, only months after Laudato Si was published, there was a meeting in Paris of the leaders of the world. 195 countries signed the Paris Climate Agreement, agreeing to lower their carbon emissions to save or to protect the planet. No? So there is an urgency that's coming from the scientific, also from the medical field, and also the military are aware of this, and they're bracing and they're preparing for it. Because as climate change causes drought, say in Africa, people have to migrate. 5,000 people died trying to cross the Mediterranean in 2016, trying to migrate to Europe because of the drought, but also because of the violence. No? There is positive change. It's perhaps happening at a greater rate than we might realize, but still we haven't stopped. I'm saying it's kind of like mopping the floor when the faucet's running. We haven't cut down the emissions enough. No, I'm talking about wind and solar energy. It's exponential, the increase. There's more solar jobs being produced in this country than there have been in all the other fossil fuel industries in the last few years. No, so unless all of us become conscious and aware of this, it's not going to get better. It's going to become even worse. No, so Bishop Desmond Tutu, he's an Anglican bishop from Africa. Perhaps he said it best. He said, everybody is part of the problem, which therefore makes everyone part of the solution. No? Even Dr. Seuss. Some of you know who Dr. Seuss is. They wrote those children's books. One of them's called The Lorax. Someone gifted me a copy of it, and they underlined a phrase. They said, make sure you read all the way to the end. And at the end of it, it says, unless someone like you cares an awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And finally, Pope Francis says we are one family and we live in one house. No? Or all interconnected. What one does affects the rest of the family. No? You find that in 1 Corinthians 12:12 and following, the mystical body idea. I mentioned that idea to a bunch of grade schoolers, and they said, one house? Then they thought for a minute, and they said, oh, you mean the planet? I said, yeah, you got it. I want to make a caution here. Climate change, global warming, is not a partisan issue. It's not a Democrat issue, a Republican issue, a Catholic issue, a Jewish, Muslim issue. It is a human issue. Therefore, it's a global issue. It concerns and involves every one of us. No? So, we need a new lifestyle. It's not hard to tell by somebody to change their lifestyle. No, change your habits. It's like turning an ocean liner around. Doesn't happen easily. No. What does that include? The principle of justice, the common good. Everybody's boat is rising. Equality, solidarity, moderation, something that hasn't been thought of or treated very well. No, something like saying Small is beautiful, less is more. Live simply that others may simply live. That's a good phrase. I saw it on a bumper sticker, and I think it summarizes this new lifestyle, no? So Pope Francis is addressing at the beginning of his encyclical, I'm addressing this to every living person on the planet. In other words, this is a human global issue. It's not a Catholic issue or a partisan issue in any sense of the word. No, he cites Pope Paul VI. Paul VI mentioned an ecological concern for the consequences of unchecked human activity. In other words, the exploitation and the pollution of nature. No, and just before the Paris Agreement took place, Pope Francis went so far as to say that humanity is on the brink of global suicide. In other words, we have an urgency here. No? St. John Paul II also addressed this, and he called for a global ecological conversion. No? He said at present there's little effort regarding the moral implications of human ecology. No? In other words, he's talking again also about that lifestyle change. No? Benedict XVI was concerned. He mentioned structural causes. In other words, he's saying it's systemic. Something in Latin America was very obvious to all of us that many of the problems, political, economic problems, were in the system itself. They went so far in Medellin to say that we call it institutionalized violence. No? Pope Francis says poverty brings violence. No? Benedict XVI said that the problem begins when we no longer admit a higher authority, a higher power. No? We become lords in our castles. We become kings of our life. And finally, I think the best of all might be Patriarch Bartholomew. He's the head of the Orthodox Church. He is to the Orthodox Church what Pope Francis is to the Roman Catholic Church. No? He said, for human beings to contaminate the world's air, its water, and its land, these are sins. We have no such right. No? In fact, he suggested replacing consumption with sacrifice, greed with generosity, wastefulness with a spirit of sharing. He calls it an asceticism. And of course, most of us think we're very far from being an ascetic. No? He says we must think in terms of giving and not just of giving up. No? Finally, there's St. Francis, the model for Pope Francis, but also for all of us, his simplicity of life. No? Getting along with what you have, not always concerned about what we don't have, someone said. No. He also, as St. Francis, had a great love for nature, because he saw in nature a reflection of the Creator in his creation. No? Pope Francis is really then suggesting that we need a new and inclusive dialogue. And he says there's hope. No? He says we must hear at the same time the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. No? He critiques technology, which has made great innovations. It's been very creative. But it also could have a downside if it forgets about ethics and the environment and concerns only about power and profit. No? So in the end, in a word, what we're talking about here in the introduction to Laudato Si is a conversion to a new lifestyle and ecological spirituality. Okay? Thank you.